Hey, Dr. Mike Scaringa here. In this video, I give a brief overview of my new book called The Trouble with Trauma: The Search to Discover How Beliefs Become Facts. It came out March 1, 2022, and is published by Central Recovery Press. The book is about two stories. The first is debunking several myths about trauma that have become enormously popular and leveraged in our society. And the second story is to explain how the human mind works and why it is so easy for humans to believe things that aren't true. I've conducted research and done clinical work in this field for nearly 30 years. And I pack a lot of insights into this book, but it's less than 200 pages, and I don't think it's a major read, and I've worked really hard to make the research clear and the concepts understandable. In the introduction to the book, I explained what happened around the year 2000, when a lot of humanitarians who work in this field seemed to appear to feel like they had hit a wall in making progress, and they needed a way to shout louder and get more attention for funding and their agenda for social projects. With the development of the concept of the adverse childhood experiences notion and the theory of toxic stress, they discovered they had a new weapon that allowed them to shout louder and get attention. Those concepts are not true, but they are widely believed. The goal of the book is to answer one big question: why do psychological experts believe concepts that are not true and feel so strongly compelled to sell them as scientific facts? We find ourselves in the remarkable position where we've accumulated a ton of new knowledge, but the answers to complicated questions seem to get more and more confusing. Why is this book important? Well, first, to me as a scientist, the truth is important, and this book serves as a correction to the historical record. I think without truth in science, there really is no role for society, for scientists in our society. Second, what I think is really the most important is to understand that trauma is being leveraged right now in society for social programs and to try to get funding from taxpayers. I call it the first modern example of neuroscience being weaponized. Why should readers care? Well, for the general population, they need to understand that supporters of these concepts are coming after your tax dollars by leveraging these concepts. For patients who are victims of trauma or in clinical care, this impacts what kind of treatment you receive. And for all of us, I think it's worth realizing that supporters of these concepts are trying to put in place social policies that affect you and your children. In Chapter 1, I describe what I call my 3 rules of how beliefs become facts. Number 1 is called a set of small false facts. Number 2 is called Stokers. And number 3 is called the power of the clan. All of these together describe a generalized process of how it is so easy for humans to believe things that aren't true and how it can be influenced. I explain these concepts with some examples that we're all familiar with, like, for example, the Iraq War in 2003 and how the Bush administration persuaded people that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction when they did not. I describe Elizabeth Holmes and the Theranos fraud. I describe the controversies with the measles vaccine and the scare for causing autism, and even Bernie Madoff and the largest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world. Understanding all of these is the concept that for human beings, self-inflation is the rule. The goal of the human mind is not to arrive at the most true facts. The goal is to arrive at the most useful beliefs. In Chapter 2, I explain the first myth about toxic stress, and I explain the research of why that's not true. And despite not being true, it's widely believed and adopted by nearly every major professional organization and agency that deals with children and women in violence. I explain how and why toxic stress was invented. I explain how a set of small false facts was used to convince people that it's true. And again, the end game here is public policy, and I give examples from major cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Orleans, and the state of California of how it's already being leveraged to influence public programs and social policy. In Chapter 3, I describe the second myth called complex PTSD, and I explain how that was invented and the research of how that's not true. Complex PTSD was not invented through a process of science. It was invented to spread an ideological narrative to try to transform how we think about human nature. Amazingly, complex PTSD has become widely embraced, even though it has zero diagnostic validity. And part of that is because the real appeal of complex PTSD is moral, not scientific. A key to the spread of this ideology is the role of Stokers. I explain how Stokers are different from what are usually called knowledge brokers in the process of policymaking. In Chapter 4, I explain the third myth, which is mother blaming for the development of PTSD in children. This is an extension of the long-held belief that parents, namely mothers, have some enormous power to influence child development, and which by extension can cause harm through the development of psychiatric disorders. This has been done for decades, initially with blaming mothers for autism and then schizophrenia, and now it's being used to blame mothers for PTSD. And I explain how all of those are not true. And I explain the third rule of how beliefs are so easily held by people through the power of the clan. In the epilogue, I try to synthesize all these things and to give an explanation of the bigger picture of what's really going on. Basically, we're in an ideology war where whether we want to be in one or not. There are groups on opposing sides trying to leverage this weapon of trauma and trying to change the meaning of trauma so that they can promote their social agendas that are consistent with their personal worldviews. In each chapter, I provide some helpful hints about what we can all do at an individual level, and I provide some helpful hints also about what patients can do to expect better treatment for themselves, and provide some hints about what we can do at an organizational level to push back. On my website, michaelscaringa.com, I provide a supplement to the book which provides more detail about debunking the research around complex PTSD, and I've also posted some links to radio interviews with me about my book and podcasts. Comments are always welcome. If you found this interesting, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel.